My background is as an antitrust practitioner. I'm not an academic, I'm not somebody who does labor or macro, but I've been at the coal face doing cases for 25 years, and so I've been there as these sectors were concentrating serially. I've seen chemicals, agrochemicals, telecoms, pharmaceuticals concentrate over that period. And of course, part of the discussion we're having today is about digital firms, but there is a broader discussion when we talk about superstar firms and their level of concentration, which is not limited to digital. I need to do something as a practitioner, which is a disclosure. I think it is a matter of practice. When you do speak from the private sector, I have to say that I've advised on multiple deals. When we talk specifically about digital, I've advised adverse to Google and Facebook. I've worked for Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, Netflix, and others. So I wanted to give you a little bit of the sense for when this issue of concentration margins surfaced somewhat at the level of the consciousness of the antitrust community. There was a meeting late in 2015 in DC at the Metropolitan Club of a small group of enforcers and practitioners and academics known as the Jevons Institute, met twice a year, once in London, once in DC. And Jason Furman, who was at the time the president of Obama's the head of the Council of Economic Advisors for President Obama, together with Peter Orszag, who was at Citibank, came and presented their results. They said they'd done some work, and they showed through this work that effectively, when you look at things over a period of time, share of income going to capital in the economy had risen, profits had risen, share of income going to labor had declined, and this was leading to an increase in inequality, while concentration at the same time was increasing. And so there was a suggestion that the greater monopoly in product market was responsible for this phenomenon that we were observing. Now, the reaction of the antitrust club hearing this was total consternation and disbelief. The reaction was, no. We are not under enforcing. Enforcement is going great. There's nothing we're doing wrong. There are no cases. And in fact, you're measuring concentration wrong because you don't know what you're doing, really. If you don't do proper antitrust markets, you're not measuring concentration in a meaningful way. And I could name the names of people who were there: FTC commissioners, acting attorney general for the DOJ, and so on. So there was a big resistance back then, 2015, to this notion that somehow antitrust had a part to play in this phenomenon of increasing concentration and shift of income towards capital rather than labor. Then, of course, fast forward 5 years later, we have seen a very much different narrative getting established. The Brandesian movement, or the progressive, however you want to call them, have essentially taken over that story. And there has been, even in other circles, a growing realization that, frankly, antitrust is under-delivered. It has failed for a number of reasons, which have to do with the time. It is always too late to actually act, and there is a number of reasons to do with your process and the way in which the process is indeed abused. There is the timidity of regulators that are a little bit too reluctant to do something too radical, and there is the total failure of remedies, which in antitrust fail to move the dial in any way. So I think that we are now in the antitrust community at a level where we understand that antitrust has a part to play in what we observe. Of course, we've observed also, and we've learned a lot about what drives these phenomena that we've talked about. Superstar firms is a terminology that has come into the common parlance through the work of people like Otto, John Van Reenen, and indeed Jan and Jan, as we know them, Jan Eckhout and Jan de Locker, who have really spent a lot of time trying to unpack what is happening here. And what is really driving this is surely a multiplicity of factors. There is something to do with inevitably technological change, the fact that there is intangible capital and advances in IT. There is also very likely the question of market power, and market power increasing, and diminution of competition, which is really very much what we are here in part to discuss, weaker antitrust enforcement. And it isn't just the Brandisians saying this. Thomas Philippon, who is a distinguished economist, NYU, has written on this with others, and has pointed to the fact that antitrust enforcement is also partly responsible for this. So where are we in all of this, and what should antitrust be doing? I mean, the reality is that in the current political economy, I think we recognize that certainly there's been an increase in concentration, the size matters, and that is certainly the product of technological changes and progress in other factors. The size of investment that you need these days is such that you really cannot hope to compete on a smaller scale. However, I think there is also a realization that this concentration of power, particularly in the digital sector, is problematic. The Brandisian talk poetically about freedom from all masters, dispersing economic power as being the purpose of antitrust rather than controlling anti-competitive behavior in a more targeted fashion. That is a big discussion that is very live across the Atlantic, and it is to do with how do we actually conceive of the purpose of antitrust. We're not there in Europe. We still have a different, perhaps, concept of antitrust, but there's no question that there is concern about what the limited effects of antitrust are going to be on things like economic discourse, political discourse, democracy. We have serious concerns about privacy and the way in which market power effectively leads to abuses of privacy at scale, for example. There's much more to say that I'm sure we'll discuss in the panel, but I'll leave it here. Thank you.